Good to see you again. Settle in. We have quite the journey ahead.
You are dead to this family. Those were the last words my mother ever said to me, not whispered, not cried. Spoken like a verdict, sharp and final, in the middle of our restaurant's private dining room, surrounded by crystal and silence, and the weight of 3 generations of Michelin stars. I was 22 years old. I had just told them I was leaving culinary school to run a soup kitchen in the industrial district. Not a trendy pop-up. Not a charity gala with photographers. A real soup kitchen. In a warehouse. For people who had nothing. My father didn't look up from his wine. My older sister Vivienne smiled that perfect poisonous smile she'd perfected since childhood. And my mother, Elena Voss, the most feared food critic in New York, the woman who could end a chef's career with a single paragraph, looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Dead, she repeated. Do you understand? You will not use our name. You will not claim our legacy. You are nothing. I understood perfectly. I packed one bag. I walked out into November rain. And I never looked back. 10 years. 10 years of waking at 4 in the morning to receive vegetable donations from grocery stores that would have thrown them away. 10 years of learning which cuts of meat the butchers couldn't sell, which bread the bakeries deemed too ugly for display, which produce had a bruise, but still had a soul. 10 years of feeding people who the city pretended didn't exist. The warehouse became 2 warehouses. The 2 became a network. I called it Second Harvest. Not because it sounded poetic, but because that's exactly what it was. Second chances. Second lives. Food that got a second breath. We didn't just feed people, we trained them. Cooks who'd lost everything to addiction found their hands again in our kitchen. Former inmates learned knife skills that became job skills. Homeless teenagers discovered that the rhythm of a professional kitchen, the call and response, the fire and focus, could rebuild a person from the inside out. By year 7, Second Harvest had 12 locations across the industrial corridor. By year 9, we'd partnered with city hospitals to provide meals for discharged patients with no support system. By year 10, we'd saved a neighborhood. The district that real estate developers had written off as a dead zone, where factories had closed and families had scattered, and hope had become something you only saw on television, began to breathe again. Because when people aren't hungry, they can think. When they can think, they can plan. When they can plan, they build. Small businesses opened. A community garden took over an empty lot. A former Second Harvest cook opened a bakery. Another started a catering company that employed only people in recovery. The neighborhood didn't gentrify. It resurrected. I lived in a small apartment above our original location. I drove a used van with 200,000 miles. I hadn't been inside a Michelin-starred restaurant in a decade, and I didn't miss it. What I missed, sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, was the idea of family. Not my family. I knew what they were. But the idea. The possibility. A table where you were wanted. The invitation arrived in a cream envelope with gold embossing. Vivienne Voss and Marcus Hale request the pleasure of your company at their wedding celebration. I stared at it for a long time. Vivienne, my sister, marrying Marcus Hale. The Hales owned the largest restaurant conglomerate on the East Coast. 27 properties, from steakhouses to fusion concepts, all of them profitable, none of them remarkable. Marcus was the only son, groomed since birth to inherit an empire built on consistency rather than creativity. I knew Marcus. Or I had once. 3 years after I'd left my family, when Second Harvest was still just one struggling warehouse and I was working 20-hour days and sleeping on a cot in the back, a young man had shown up at our door. Clean hands, expensive boots, a look in his eyes that I recognized. The look of someone trying to escape a life that had been chosen for them. I want to volunteer, he'd said. We don't take tourists, I'd replied. I'm not a tourist, I'm a cook. Or I was. I'm trying to remember why I started. He'd stayed for 6 months. He'd worked the line during our busiest hours, scrubbed pots at midnight, sat with our guests and listened to their stories. He'd been good, genuinely good, with instincts that couldn't be taught. But more than that, he'd been kind. In a world that punished kindness as weakness, he'd been unafraid. We'd become friends. Maybe something more, if I'd let it. But I was still rebuilding myself, still learning to trust my own hands again. And when he'd left, returned to his family's empire, he said, but changed. I'd wished him well and locked the feeling away. That was 7 years ago. Now he was marrying my sister. I almost threw the invitation away. I should have. But something in me, stubbornness, maybe, or the old wound that never fully closed, wanted to see them. Wanted to see her. Wanted to walk into that world one more time and prove that I hadn't been destroyed. I RSVP'd yes. The wedding was at the Hale Estate in Connecticut, a property that looked like it had been imported from a European fairy tale. Tents, flowers, a string quartet. 300 guests in clothes that cost more than my annual budget for feeding 5,000 people. I wore a simple black dress I'd bought at a department store. No jewelry, my hair pulled back. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who spent her mornings unloading trucks and her afternoons managing a nonprofit, who hadn't thought about fashion in a decade and didn't intend to start. The whispers started before I reached the tent. Is that? It can't be. She was disowned. Look at her. She looks like she works in a cafeteria. I kept walking. I found the bar, accepted a glass of water, and stood near the edge where I could watch without being watched. Vivienne appeared on the arm of our father, looking like a magazine spread. Her dress was a masterpiece of lace and intention, her makeup flawless, her smile that same perfect instrument she'd always used to get what she wanted. She saw me. Her eyes flickered. Surprise, then calculation, then that familiar cold amusement. She made her way through the crowd like a queen through her court, pausing to accept congratulations, to air-kiss cheeks, to perform the role she'd been born for. When she reached me, she didn't embrace me. She looked me up and down with the thoroughness of a quality inspector finding a flaw. Well, she said, the prodigal daughter returns. Or should I say, the prodigal charity worker? Hello, Vivienne. Mother will be thrilled. She so loves a spectacle. She leaned closer, her perfume overwhelming. Tell me, dear sister, do you still smell like cabbage? I can almost detect it. I smell like work, I said. It's an acquired scent. Her laugh was musical and empty. How quaint. And your little, what do you call it? Soup kitchen? How adorable that you've kept it going all these years, like a child with a lemonade stand that never grew up. Second Harvest feeds 12,000 meals a week, I said quietly. We trained 47 people into culinary jobs last year. 3 of them now run their own businesses. Numbers. She waved her hand. Mother always said you had no sense of scale. Marcus, darling. Marcus had appeared at her side, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo. He saw me, and his face changed. Recognition, warmth, something complicated that he quickly suppressed. Clara, he said. It's good to see you. Marcus, congratulations. Vivienne's hand tightened on his arm. Marcus volunteered at Clara's little project once, years ago. Can you imagine? A Hale, working in a soup kitchen. It was his rebellious phase. She laughed. But he came to his senses. I learned a lot there, Marcus said quietly. I'm sure you did. Vivienne's smile sharpened. You learned what not to become. She swept him away, but not before I saw the look in Marcus's eyes. Apology. Regret. Something unspoken. I finished my water and considered leaving. This was a mistake. I knew it was a mistake. But before I could move, a voice cut through the crowd like a knife through silk. Clara Voss. My mother. She stood at the center of the tent holding a champagne flute, wearing a dress the color of dried blood. She was 63 years old and looked 45, preserved by power and spite. The crowd parted around her like water around stone. Everyone, she said, her voice carrying effortlessly. Everyone, look who has graced us with her presence. My youngest daughter, the one who chose garbage over glory. Silence spread in a circle. 300 faces turned to stare. 10 years ago, this child stood in my restaurant and announced she was leaving to feed the homeless. Mother laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The homeless, as if they were some noble cause, rather than the refuse of a failed society. She threw away 3 generations of culinary excellence to play Mother Teresa in a warehouse. I felt my face burn. My hands shook. I gripped my water glass so hard I thought it might break. And look at her now. Mother walked toward me, her heels clicking on the temporary floor. No husband, no children, no career. Running a charity kitchen like a servant, wearing a $50 dress to her sister's wedding. She stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the lines around her eyes, the cruelty that had deepened them over decades. Tell me, Clara, was it worth it? Was your little mission of mercy worth becoming nothing? I looked at her. I looked at Vivienne, smiling in the background. I looked at my father, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at 300 people who had come to celebrate love and were instead being fed a meal of humiliation. I could have spoken. I had words. I always had words, stored up over 10 years of silent nights. I could have told her about the man who'd cried when he tasted his first proper meal after 6 months on the street. About the teenager who'd learned to make bread and was now in culinary school on a full scholarship. About the neighborhood that had been dying and was now alive because someone had cared enough to show up every day. But none of those words would have mattered. Not to her. Not to any of them. So I didn't speak. I set my water glass on a passing tray. I straightened my $50 dress. And I walked out of that tent, through the garden, down the long driveway, without looking back. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, carrying one last barb. As I said, dead to this family. I kept walking. The story broke 3 weeks later. I was in the kitchen at Second Harvest, prepping a massive batch of vegetable stew for the lunch service, when my phone started buzzing. Text after text. Then a call from a number I didn't recognize. Is this Clara Voss? Speaking. This is Daniel Reeves from the Culinary Tribune. I'm calling about the allegations against your sister, Vivienne Voss. What allegations? He paused. You haven't seen the news? I hadn't. I didn't watch news. I didn't have time. Your sister's cookbook, The Voss Collection, which was released last year and won the James Beard Award, there are credible allegations that the majority of the recipes were stolen. Lifted from unpublished manuscripts, from restaurant kitchens where she'd staged briefly, from a former assistant who claims she took his work and put her name on it. I set down my knife. What? The evidence is extensive. Dated emails, photographs of original documents, testimony from multiple sources. And it's not just the cookbook. There are allegations that recipes used in your family's restaurants, the ones that earned your father his 3rd Michelin star, were also misappropriated. I sat down on a milk crate. The kitchen around me continued its rhythm, chopping, stirring, the clatter of pots, but I felt like I was underwater. Your mother, Reeves continued, has been accused of knowing and covering it up. There are emails suggesting she used her influence as a critic to silence chefs who threatened to speak out. And your father. The restaurants are being investigated. The Michelin Guide has announced a review. The James Beard Foundation has rescinded Vivienne's award. I swallowed. I don't understand. Your family's reputation is collapsing, Ms. Voss. The Voss name, which was synonymous with culinary excellence, is now synonymous with theft and fraud. And I wanted to know, as the daughter who left that world, who built something entirely different, what is your response? I looked around the kitchen. My kitchen. Not perfect, not glamorous, but honest. Every recipe here was original, developed by me or by the cooks we'd trained, tested on real people who needed real food. No stolen glory, no borrowed genius, just work and care. and time. I have no response, I said. I'm busy. I hung up. The next month was a hurricane. Vivian's cookbook was pulled from shelves. The publisher announced a full investigation and recalled all copies. My father's restaurant saw reservations cancel en masse, not because the food had changed, but because no one wanted to be seen eating stolen cuisine. My mother's column was suspended by the Tribune, and a group of prominent chefs published an open letter calling for her permanent removal from food journalism. The family tried to fight. Lawyers were hired, statements were issued. Vivian gave a tearful interview claiming she'd been influenced by the pressure to succeed. My mother attacked the accusers on social media, calling them jealous mediocrities. My father retreated to his country house and stopped answering calls. But the evidence was overwhelming. Recipe after recipe traced back to its true origin. A line cook from Chicago who developed a sauce technique that appeared in the Voss collection with Vivian's name on it. A pastry chef from San Francisco whose signature dessert had become a Voss family classic. A former assistant who'd kept copies of his original work, dated and documented, proving that Vivian had taken his recipes months before the book's publication. The empire crumbled with astonishing speed. Michelin stripped my father's flagship restaurant of its stars. The other properties closed one by one, unable to survive without the Voss name to draw customers. The Hales, sensing disaster, broke off the engagement. Marcus's father announced that the families would no longer be joining, which was corporate speak for, "We're running before the ship sinks." Vivian disappeared from public view. My mother was photographed leaving her apartment in dark glasses, hounded by reporters. My father was rumored to be drinking heavily. And me? I kept working. The call came on a Tuesday, during our busiest lunch service. "Clara, it's Marcus." I stepped into the back alley, holding my phone with a hand that smelled like onions. "Marcus, how are you?" "I'm surviving." He sounded exhausted. "The engagement is off. My father made that decision. I didn't fight him." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I should have ended it myself. I knew what Vivian was. I think I always knew." He paused. "I'm calling because your family is in trouble. Serious trouble. Your father's restaurants are all closed or closing. Your mother's been fired from every publication. Vivian hasn't left her apartment in weeks. And there's something else." "What?" "The creditors. Your father took out massive loans to expand the restaurant group, using the Voss name as collateral. Now that the name is worthless, the creditors are calling. They're going to lose everything. The apartment, the country house, the private collection of wine and art. Everything." I leaned against the brick wall. The autumn sun was weak, barely warming the alley. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because they need help, Clara. And you're the only one who can give it." I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. "Marcus, my mother told me I was dead to the family. She humiliated me in front of 300 people. My sister has spent 10 years treating me like a joke. My father never once defended me. And now, when their empire of lies collapses, I'm supposed to ride in and save them?" "No," he said quietly. "You're not supposed to do anything. But I know you, Clara. I know who you are. And I know that the woman who built Second Harvest from nothing, who fed strangers when no one else would, that woman doesn't abandon people, even people who don't deserve her. You don't know me anymore, Marcus. It's been 7 years. I know enough." I ended the call. I went back inside. I served lunch to 400 people. But that night, I didn't sleep. I didn't go to them immediately. I waited. I watched the news. I read the reports of my mother's public breakdown, my father's retreat into alcohol, Vivian's complete silence. I waited for one of them to reach out, to apologize, to acknowledge, even for a moment, that they'd been wrong. No one called. 2 weeks after Marcus's call, I made a decision. Not for them. For me. Because the person I'd become in that warehouse, the person who showed up every morning, who believed that everyone deserved dignity, who understood that hunger was hunger whether it was for food or for forgiveness, that person wouldn't let 3 human beings destroy themselves without at least offering a hand. I didn't go as a daughter. I didn't go as a savior. I went as Clara Voss, the woman who'd built something real, and I went to see if there was anything left to save. My parents' apartment was in chaos. Moving boxes everywhere. Furniture covered in sheets. My father sat in a leather chair that was tagged with a sticker from an auction house, a bottle of bourbon in his hand, staring at nothing. My mother moved through the rooms like a ghost, picking up objects and putting them down, her hair unbrushed, her eyes red-rimmed. Vivienne was in her old bedroom, the one she'd had as a teenager, lying on the bed in clothes she hadn't changed in days. She looked smaller than I remembered. Fragile. The perfect porcelain doll had cracked, and something ugly was showing through the breaks. "What are you doing here?" my mother asked when she saw me. Her voice was flat, empty of its usual edge. "I came to help." "Help?" She laughed, a broken sound. "Help with what? We're losing everything. The apartment, the house, the restaurants. Your father's drinking himself to death. Your sister won't eat. And you with your soup kitchen and your noble poverty, what can you possibly help with?" I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in my life, I saw her not as a monster, not as a tyrant, but as a woman. A woman who'd built her entire identity on being feared and respected, who'd sacrificed everything, warmth, kindness, family, for the altar of reputation, and who was now watching that altar burn. "I can help you survive," I said. "Not as the Voss dynasty, that name is gone, and it should be gone, but as people, as human beings who need to eat and sleep and find something to do with the rest of their lives." "Why?" Vivienne's voice came from the bedroom doorway. She looked terrible, thin, pale, her eyes swollen. "Why would you help us after what we did to you?" "Because helping people is what I do," I said. "It's not conditional. It's not transactional. I don't help people because they deserve it. I help them because they need it." "You're either a saint or a fool," my mother said. "Probably both," I agreed. "But I'm also the only person offering. So, do you want my help, or do you want to keep drowning?" The plan took shape over the following weeks. My father's drinking was the first problem. I didn't try to shame him into stopping. I'd seen enough addiction at Second Harvest to know that shame was fuel, not cure. Instead, I took him to our original location, the warehouse where it had all started, and I put him to work. Not as a chef, not as a critic, as a dishwasher. "You want me to wash dishes?" he'd asked, horrified. "I want you to be useful," I said. "I want you to see what happens when people work together. I want your hands to be too busy to hold a bottle." He resisted at first. Then he accepted. Then, slowly, something changed. The rhythm of the kitchen, the same rhythm that had saved so many others, began to work on him. He started talking to the other volunteers. He learned their names. He heard their stories. A former investment banker who'd lost everything in a divorce. A veteran with PTSD who found peace in the repetition of scrubbing. A teenager who'd aged out of foster care and was trying to build a life. My father had spent 40 years in kitchens surrounded by ambition and fear. Now he was in a kitchen surrounded by survival and hope. The contrast broke something in him and rebuilt it differently. My mother was harder. She couldn't cook. She'd never cooked, only criticized. She couldn't wash dishes. Her hands shook too much, and her pride wouldn't allow it. She couldn't serve. She looked at our guests with the same contempt she'd always had, and I wouldn't allow that in my house. So I gave her a desk, a computer, a task. "We need grant applications," I told her. "We need to expand our nutrition education program. We need someone who can write persuasively about food, about its power, about why it matters. You spent 40 years writing about restaurants. Now write about why people need them. I don't know how to write about need, she said. I only know how to write about excellence. Then learn. It took her a month to produce a single paragraph. It was terrible, cold, distant, full of the same elitism that had poisoned her career. I made her rewrite it 20 times, 50 times. I made her interview our guests, sit with them, listen to them. I made her understand that a meal wasn't about technique or presentation. It was about survival, about dignity, about the basic human right to not be hungry. Her second attempt was better. Her 10th was good. Her 20th was published in a local magazine, and someone sent a check. Her 30th won a small journalism award, and this time, the award was for writing that helped people rather than destroyed them. Vivienne was the hardest of all. She wouldn't leave her room at first. She wouldn't eat. She wouldn't speak. I brought her meals. Simple, nourishing food, not the elaborate dishes she'd grown up with, but soup and bread and vegetables. I left them outside her door. Sometimes she ate them. Sometimes she didn't. After 3 weeks, I stopped leaving the tray and knocked on her door. Go away. No. I said go away. I heard you. I'm not going. A long silence. Then the door opened. She looked worse than before. The perfect beauty was gone, replaced by something raw and painful. Why are you doing this? Why are you being kind to me? I was terrible to you. I stole recipes, Clara. I stole people's work and put my name on it. I'm a fraud. I'm nothing. You're not nothing, I said. You're a person who made terrible choices. There's a difference. I don't know how to be anything else. I was raised to be perfect, to be the best, to win at any cost. And when I couldn't win honestly, she trailed off, tears sliding down her face. I cheated. I stole. I destroyed people who were better than me because I couldn't stand not being the best. I know. And you still want to help me? I want to help you become someone else. Someone who doesn't need to steal to feel worthy. Someone who can cook, really cook, with your own hands and your own mind, and be proud of it, even if no one ever gives you an award. She stared at me. I don't know if I can. Then we'll find out together. It took a year. A year of my father washing dishes and slowly, tentatively, helping with prep work. A year of him rediscovering the joy of cooking without the pressure of stars or critics. A year of him teaching our trainees basic techniques, not as a master to apprentices, but as one human sharing knowledge with another. A year of my mother writing, not reviews, but stories. Stories about the people who came through our doors, about the grandmother who walked 3 miles every day for our soup because it was the only place she felt seen, about the young man who'd learned to make bread and was now sending postcards from culinary school, about the neighborhood that had been saved not by a critic's pen, but by a community's hands. A year of Vivienne in our kitchen, starting from the absolute beginning, chopping onions until her hands blistered, making stock from scraps, burning pans, ruining sauces, crying in frustration, and then, slowly, improving. Finding her own voice, her own style, separate from the stolen recipes she'd depended on. She wasn't brilliant, she'd never be the genius she pretended to be, but she was competent, and more importantly, she was honest. The Voss name never recovered. My father's restaurants never reopened. My mother's column was never reinstated. Vivienne's cookbook remained pulped, her award permanently revoked. The dynasty was dead, and it deserved to be dead. But the people, my father, my mother, my sister, they lived, they changed, they became something else. On the 10th anniversary of Second Harvest's founding, we held a celebration, not a gala, a meal. A long table in the warehouse where it had all started, covered in simple white cloth, loaded with food that my father had helped prepare, that Vivienne had contributed to, that my mother had written about. Our guests, the homeless, the recovering, the struggling, the hopeful, sat alongside volunteers, donors, community members. No hierarchy, no separation, just people eating together. Marcus was there. He'd left his family's empire, started a small restaurant that employed only people in recovery, modeled on what he'd learned at Second Harvest. He sat next to me, his shoulder touching mine, and we didn't need to say anything. My mother stood up to speak. She was nervous. The woman who'd once commanded rooms of 300 people with effortless cruelty now trembled in front of 100 strangers. But she spoke. "I spent my life," she said, "believing that food was about excellence, about perfection, about being better than everyone else. I taught my daughters that worth was something you earned through victory, and I destroyed one of them when she chose a different path." She looked at me. Her eyes were wet. Clara taught me that food is about survival, about dignity, about the radical act of feeding someone who cannot feed themselves. She built something real while I was playing with illusions, and when my illusions collapsed, she was the only one who offered me a place at her table. She raised her glass. To my daughter, the one I discarded, the one who saved me. I didn't cry. I'd done enough crying over the years, but I felt something shift, some final weight lifting from my shoulders. Not forgiveness. That was too simple, too easy. But peace. The peace of knowing that I hadn't let their cruelty turn me cruel. That I'd built something better than revenge. I'd built a world where even they could find redemption. Vivian came to me after the meal, her hands stained with the work of cooking, her face flushed with heat and effort. "I made the bread pudding," she said. "It's not award-winning, but it's mine. Every recipe, every step. Mine." "I know. I tasted it. It's good." She smiled, a real smile, imperfect and tentative, nothing like the polished mask she'd worn for so long. "Thank you, Clara, for not giving up on me, for not being like me." "I couldn't be like you," I said. "I tried that world. It almost destroyed me. I had to find my own way." "You did. You really did." She hesitated. "I'm going to stay. At Second Harvest. If you'll have me. I want to keep learning. I want to keep cooking. I want to spend my life making things that are real, even if no one ever writes about them." "We'd be glad to have you." She hugged me. It was awkward, uncertain, the embrace of two people who were still learning how to be family, but it was real. That night, after everyone had gone, I walked through the empty warehouse. The kitchen was clean, the tables folded, the space quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stood in the spot where I'd first set up a hot plate 10 years ago, where I'd fed my first guest, where I'd begun the work that would define my life. My mother had been wrong. I wasn't dead to the family. I'd simply become the only part of it that was alive. The Voss dynasty was gone, replaced by something better. Not an empire, a community, not a legacy of stars and stolen recipes, but a legacy of second chances and honest meals. My father washed dishes with dignity. My mother wrote words that helped. My sister cooked food that was truly hers. And I was exactly where I'd always wanted to be. In a kitchen that fed people, in a life that mattered. The revenge I never sought had happened anyway. Not through destruction, but through construction. I'd built something so real, so necessary, so irreplaceable, that when their world of illusions collapsed, mine was the only world left standing. I didn't need to humiliate them. I didn't need to expose them. I didn't need to say a single word at that wedding, because the truth I'd built over 10 years spoke louder than any accusation ever could. The daughter they discarded had outlasted them all, not because she was crueler or smarter or more ruthless, because she was kinder, because she understood that the only real power was the power to help someone who couldn't help themselves. I turned off the lights. I locked the door. I walked home through a neighborhood that was alive because people had cared enough to feed it. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had won the only victory that mattered.